Okay, hello everybody. This is the third teach-in for today. This is planting beneficial companions. Also could be looked at as building plant communities. So you might have heard some of the other teach-ins today. My name is Squiyu and I work with permaculture. At its root base, it's permanent culture. Agriculture is the gathering of fungus and plants and flowers and spores in order to eat. Permaculture is not so much agriculture as it is defining the systems through which you can do agriculture that are permanent, that are stable and support themselves without a direct need for an everyday influence from humans. It's too much work and it just doesn't make much sense. We brought a few of our plants here today. Some people have already spoken about how we use straw. The reason we use straw is because from an evolutionary perspective, the soil was designed to take the harmful sun's radiation, filter it through these pretty green leaves, and make food for the soil that all the earthworms and everything else can eat. If the dangerous radiation touches the soil, instead of touching the leaves, it dries it out. There's no more water to feed with, all of the nutrients get baked out, and any living creatures that are feeding will be dried up and killed. We want to build systems that are holistic in design, meaning that while you can certainly look at any individual part of the garden and plant of the garden and find functions and purposes, you can also look at any section of the garden and see a direct interconnectedness and repeating functions that support each other and support the garden's overall continual growth. So we do things in layers. By maximizing your vertical space, using all of the layers of a natural occurring forest, plants protect each other, they maximize their own space, and they also support each other as trellises. So we've got here Chickasaw plum. This is a native plum tree. You could take cuttings of it and make a new tree, or you could plant it from the seed. This has been here for so long, it was designed for this place. You don't need to water it. You put it in the ground in a system that feeds it nicely, and it just keeps going. This is all we want to do in permaculture. We don't want to tire ourselves out. We don't want to think about all the ways it could go wrong. What we want to do is think about the way that things normally go wrong and prevent that from happening. If we can avoid what usually happens, then we learn the rest from experience. So I've got this tree here, and it's perfect. It's a wonderful plant. It's got these leaves on it. It's got little budding fruits that are starting from the flowers that were on here. But by itself, it only really has one purpose. This is edible. Okay, well, if I look at this one, I've got two plants in here. This one is a squash family. This is a vine. This one is definitely an onion. Onions are going to deter any weed plants, as we call them, from growing. And then this squash just wants to go up. It's a vine. Well, what would happen if I put it right beside this tree? It'd go all the way up the tree. It might even come over once it gets to the top and has nothing else and just hang in the midair. This plant is perfectly fine fighting the forces of gravity as long as it has a friend. So basically, when looking at plants, we look at what we're trying to achieve through the plants. When we first set up a system, we need nitrogen. Without carbon and nitrogen, your plants do not have leaves. This is why they say nitrogen is for shoots. It's this that gives us the greenery. So if I pick this leaf right now and I drop it back in that pot, I'm feeding this system with its own waste stream. When you see people who are putting out their wood or their other things to the yard on the side of the road, this is people who just don't understand yet how they can use their waste stream. I've got these trees right here that fall down every now and then. They make little piles, but nothing happens to this. If we just put it back in the ground, a lot would happen. It would get eaten, it would become nutrients, it would feed the future generations. We've got palm that grows everywhere, and it turns out palm is huge in phosphorus, one of the major 3 components. By burying palm, you're making the roots of every other plant around it stronger, deeper, and longer. By doing the nitrogen, by just taking your green cutting, dropping it back in, feeding the plant to itself, the plant gets more leaves. I dropped in 1 leaf and that will feed about 3 or 4 more, because it's not just this, it's the sun. It's the interconnectedness of the plant's relationships that allow them to grow. The last one we have, which I actually had a yummy banana today, I just threw this in this Chickasaw plum tree because everyone knows bananas are huge in potassium. When you buy a fertilizer bag, you're looking at phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium. I've already talked about 2, and the potassium is for the fruits. This one has already gone to flower. It's starting to produce fruits now. By feeding it a little extra potassium, those fruits just got bigger and a little bit more juicy. So, who here has a garden? Everybody? Excellent. When we talk about annuals and perennials, as others have said, this doesn't necessarily mean an inherent attribute of the plant. It's how plants are here. For example, I've got this plant, it's herbaceous, it's a basil. It's not gonna get more than 3 feet high. It's perfect to sit around your other stuff. It's not a bush, it's not a tree, it's just below that. This is perennial. This is from Africa. It would be perennial there also, but since we have basically the same type of climate as the area this is found in, it never dies. It goes to seed. You could save the seeds. It might dormant over in a heavy frost, or it might wilt a little bit in a heavy heat, but it still lives. There's nothing that will kill this plant for years.
It'll come back.
Yeah, it'll come right back. It's dormancy. There are 2 types of typical plant behaviors, especially in trees. There's the hurry up and wait philosophy, and then there's the slow and steady philosophy. Hurry up and wait is also for perennials that can frost. They grow as fast as they can while they can, and as soon as a frost comes, the plant inactivates and it decides, I'm going to wait until spring comes around again and I'll start growing. Most of what we call perennials are plants that hurry up and wait. They just don't want to die, and they know they won't be able to get too much from their active involvement in the times that are tough. So they wait it out. Alternatively, we have some plants, like this black locust, for example, which is going to do all year round. If it follows out in some little areas, more leaves grow because it's never going to want to just die off or dormant off. We see that in pine trees. We see that in a lot of the stuff around. All of this is just working together because this is what our environment has designed. We have extreme carbon issues because we've taken a lot of the nature out of life. But by putting the nature back in, we're fixing the planet, and we're actually getting a benefit from having too much carbon, because that's going to help everything grow faster and stronger. What time do I have?
Still got 23 minutes.
23? Okay, so talking about your home garden, everybody likes to start with nitrogen. Legumes are bees or peas. A tree that's a bean or a pea, or anything of that typical family. Every second they're growing, they are fertilizing nitrogen, everything around them. If you look later on, up at Jessica Nelson's house, where there's a lot of plants and some guilds, we've got Austrian winter peas down. This small cover crop basically just protects the soil from direct sunlight touching it and photosynthesizes. They're edible and they're adding nitrogen. So when the next season comes, after you've added all your nitrogen and you've harvested, you've basically just got very good soil. It doesn't matter what you want to grow at that point. You've prepped your soil. You've put life back into the system. It's the life that is constantly being fed and changed through each plant to each other. It's just life that you need to have in your system. So we have 7 layers. As we know, this is a tree. This is a tree. Very small right now. This would be your understory tree because it's a fruit tree. The understory trees are typically heavy leaf droppers. They give you a lot of your carbon back and they give you a lot of your fruits. Then you've got your larger trees, which would be the canopy, Could be something like this, more something like that behind you. And this would be a heavy leaf dropper that typically does the hurry up and wait. So in the winter, a lot of sun still comes down around it, but in the summer, it creates shade so that plants can still grow around it. Either way, this tree is serving functions in your system. Just clearing out land so that you could have a flat space and see all of your plants is not helping your plants. It might help your sense of aesthetic appeal, but for the amount of work that you have to put into it, it's just not sensible or practical. So we've got 2 layers of tall trees, your canopy and your understory, and everywhere that we want and everywhere that we can, we put vines up these things because vertical space is where you get most of your growing action. Underneath there, we get the bushes. The bushes are some of the heaviest producers of fruit of any other plant. They come back so fast, they grow so fast, and they propagate themselves all over the place. Bushes are great, and they sit right beside your next thing, which would be your roots. We call it the rhizosphere, your carrots, your turnips. By putting a big hole in the ground, what the plants are doing is taking the deep nutrients from the inner lower levels of subsoil and then filtering it up into their huge leaves, which by the way are the most nutritious salad greens that you're likely to eat, are from your root vegetables mostly. So they'd make these huge leaves that are both the best compost, a huge part of the system to maximize your space, and like I said, stacking functions. They can grow under the shade of a tree. You're just maximizing your space. Cover crop goes over everything, or straw, because you want to protect your soil. You get your staple foods, like your corn and stuff. You have to use them as a stake because permaculture is about thinking, how can I make this easier, more effective, and more time oriented? I don't want to spend all my time out here. So my best suggestion to everybody in trying to learn permaculture and trying to learn plants, find the plants that you like to eat a lot, experiment with growing them, and think about, realistically, if you were trying to pack a storage unit full of plants, how would you make it all fit? Take that philosophy, put it in your garden outside. You want it to be as close and as booming as you can because in a plant community, they don't strangle each other out and compete. In a plant community, they each bring in more reasons for all the rest of the garden to thrive. Thank you. That's what I got today.